afternoon. I call this meeting of the La Feria Independent School District to order. I'm sorry, it is 6:09, and I call this meeting of the La Feria Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members are present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Please stand.
If you'll please bow your heads. Light of truth and of kindness, our Lord and our God, we cannot start the proceedings of this meeting without directing to you our call and praise. Lord our God, give us the opportunity to gain from this meeting increased unity of purpose and will, the best intentions for programs and projects, and all that we do for our awesome district, Lord. We thank you. Bless abundantly all who are present, so that through this meeting we may be granted a mind to know you, a heart to seek you, wisdom to find you, and conduct pleasing to you. Lord, we thank you for Alex, and we thank you for Judy, and we thank you for blessing us with them. And please be with them on their new journey as they leave us soon. We thank you again for all you do for us, and we thank you for this beautiful city of La Feria. In your name I pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible.
It is now 6:11 p.m. and we are closing the regular board meeting to an open public meeting discussing the proposed budget and preliminary tax rates for school year 23-24.
Thank you, Board President. Good evening, board members present, Superintendent Torres, the community that's here. What we're going to discuss is the proposed budget for the 23-24 fiscal year. So I wanted to go over some of the information. A lot of the information we've already been going over for these last few months, especially with the legislation that have been going on. And unfortunately, since we didn't get a lot of clear answers on funding, we're basing a lot of our projections based on current law, which is old law, the same as we prepared it in the previous years. So we go on to the first slide. So on this one, what I wanted to show was our projected revenue. So what I do is I state the last 2 years, our projected revenue, which is our 21-22 fiscal year revenue. That one is actual. And I did give out all the board members a handout. So if you guys want to follow along with that, with the handout, it's page 1, it's 10 pages. So the 21-22 revenue, that's actual, that's already been audited by our independent auditors. Our current fiscal year, that's about to end this Friday, that's our 22-23 expected revenue. Those numbers, for the most part, should be pretty final. However, they are, will change slightly as we submit all of our final PIMS data. And then once we calculate all of our final property tax collections and, other deposits that we've had. Having said that, the main one is for next year, our proposed revenue. As you all recall, we had a huge increase in our property tax values. So there was a 35% increase in our property values. Now remember that with that, there is a 10% cap. So our taxable values, what I use, right now it's based on preliminary numbers from our cash. We won't get our certified values until July. So unfortunately, right now we go with preliminary numbers. Having said that, run some preliminary rates. Our expected property tax collection that we'll get in our M&O side would be around $8 million. So that's why I put that our local revenue would be $8.3 million. Our state aid would be about $25.5 million. And then our federal funding, it would be about 1.4. So our estimated revenue for next year will be $35,325,890. And again, this is all projected revenue. If we go on to the next slide, I think this will help explain where some of those numbers are coming from. For some of our local state and federal funding is coming from. As I explained earlier, from our property tax collections, it is actually a little bit under 7 million. And then we do have other local funding that we get to keep. For example, one of them is our investment income. That's the interest that we generate in our investment book. That's where we keep all of our funding until we roll it over to our bank to pay out. Some of our indirect costs, as I've been talking about, are two of our biggest grants that are about to expire. Those two grants, we've been able to keep the unrestricted rate, which is a little bit over 11%. So that's been huge. It was huge last year, and it was huge this year. For next year, it's not as much. If we were to compare this to last year, this year I'm only under indirect costs. It's only about 275,000 as opposed to this year and last year, we were around $500,000. And again, the main one was our two ESSER grants. Of course, we do keep the restricted indirect cost rate from our other federal programs, the main ones being Title I and IDEA-B. Those are our two biggest ones. From our state aid, that is our foundation school program. We've talked about this one, time and time again. That is the one that is affected by our legislature. That is the one that does our state programs, everything from basic program education, dyslexia, special ed, bilingual. CTE is one of our biggest ones. So with that, we calculated about $22.2 million. Where did we come up with that? Remember that there's the Omar Garcia funding template that we use, or that I use. We input a lot of our data, which is our preliminary tax rate, our preliminary or our expected tax collections. And then we put a lot of our PIMS data, our student data. So we use current data. So when I went ahead and I projected this revenue from state aid, I used our final numbers at the end of this school year. So for example, our enrollment. On the last day of school, our enrollment was 2,931 students. Our estimated attendance for the 22-23 school year, if we take the top 6 weeks, was approximately 93.6%. And again, we took the top 6 weeks because the district had a 5% migrant student population. So with that, there is a Texas Education Code, there is a ruling that says you can take away the 2 lowest 6 weeks. So that helped us out a little bit. So once we take that into consideration, once we refine our ADA, remember that for our pre-K kids, for our pre-K3, we only get half an ADA. Having done all that, our refined estimated ADA would have been 2,619 students. That is important because again, the majority of our funding from the state is based on attendance, not enrollment. Some of our state allotments are based on enrollment, but the majority of it is based on attendance. And then under federal, the 1.4 million, most of it is gonna come from our SHARs. We did, as you all recall, last year we switched providers. We went from Texas State Billing to Onward, so they helped us a lot with our coding, making sure that our kids were, the billing that we were giving was being done properly. And with that, they were able to help us out a lot in our SHARs cost report. Last year, we gained maybe about $700,000. So for next year, we expect to get about 1.4 million. So that, again, that helped us offset the reduction in our state aid. We put all that together, our estimated revenue would be about $34.6 million. Our fund balance projects, remember we still have some of it that's carrying over, specifically the scoreboard, the high school painting, and then of course we also have some of the electric gates, but I think we have one final payment pending. So with all that, even though it was approved in this year's fiscal year, because it hasn't been paid, because some of the services haven't been completed, it rolls over into next year. So that's why that's the $720,000. So the estimated total revenue that we would use, including some of it coming out of our fund balance, would be $35.3 million. Any questions on the revenue?
I would have a question, it's more of a statement, sir.
Yes.
I know the principals work very hard to get the kids to school. I mean,
Yes,
they
oh, yes.
providing incentives and so forth. And I believe the goal is 95%, correct? So
That's correct.
What if we had met the goal, like,
If we would have met the goal, and this is again, every district varies because of the number of kids we have, and then depending on the kids, how they're coded.
right,
For our district, for our size, every 1% is approximately about $500,000 in funding.
half a mil?
Yes. And we've gone over that with with our staff as well, how
Right.
important it is, right, for a district our size, $500,000 is significant.
Definitely.
But again, every district does vary because every district has different number of special ed kids, different number of bilingual kids, a different number of CTE kids. So all that plays a factor into it.
So being at 93.6%, roughly around between 800,000 that we, below of the goal that we.
Exactly, yes. And so remember, last year, we had budgeted around 94, 95%, so we were below that. So what does that mean? We ended up losing a little bit of our state aid, and that'll be recaptured in the last payment in July. And then another thing, of course, as y'all recall, the whole issue with our property values, it was way off from what the CAT said to what the comptroller said. So there, we were gonna lose some additional funding, and that is still in the appeal process. But we were able to make up some of our revenue in some of these other categories. When we budgeted, we try to budget conservative. So because we budgeted conservative, we were able to generate a lot more revenue in indirect costs, which I mentioned because of the ESSER grants, in our investment income. At the beginning of last year, we were just starting to get out of COVID, so a lot of the interest rates were really low. And then around September, October, then that's when they started kicking up. And of course, right now, that's what the Fed's trying to do, right, increasing interest rates, which in our case, it helped us out in the aspect of generating interest income. So that's been a huge help for us this school year, and that'll be a huge help for 23-24 school year.
I just need a clarification. On the estimated refined ADA, is that the 2,619, that's what the state funds us?
That's correct, yes.
Not
On
the 2,931?
No, the 2,931 is only used for specific allotments that use enrollment instead of ADA. But our main foundation school program is based off ADA.
So
And
that's
so,
why,
for example,
yeah.
CTE is based off enrollment. I know that bilingual, a certain part of it is based off enrollment. So there are specific state programs that are based on enrollment. The majority of it is all based on ADA, yes. All right, so we go into the next page. This is very preliminary tax rates. I've been working with TASBO, with Moken Casey, with some of these numbers. So I wanted to show a little bit of our historical analysis for the last 4 tax years, and then of course the proposed one. And it is proposed because we're not adopting a tax rate tonight. That doesn't get adopted until September, and then it takes effect October 1st. So our preliminary numbers for next year, again, what we look at is TA releasing the maximum compressed rates, which they actually just released them this week. And that is based, we have to look at other things that they look at. And then of course our INS. Our INS is another component that we have to take a look at to see if we generate enough revenue to pay off our long-term debt, our bonds. The bonds that we went out for, we have to be able to generate enough. If we don't, then the difference we have to pay out of general fund. So having said that, our preliminary number for INS, as you can see on the INS side, it did increase about 3 pennies. But overall, the tax rate for our community would only go up by roughly about 0.001. And again, this is preliminary. It could be lower when we finally present the one to adopt in September, or it could be slightly higher. But again, having said that, just like the district's property values, everybody's residential values went up significantly, so they are expecting to pay a little bit more in these coming years. We go on to the next slide. This is just a list of our federal and state programs. This is not required, but we'd like to show our board exactly what grants we have going on. So this is grants that we'll have for most of the year for next year. So of course we have all of our ESSA grants, which is Title I, Part A, Title I, Part C, which is my grant. We have Title II, Part A, which is the Support and Effective Instruction, and Title IV, which is Security. Those are your Every Student Succeeds Act grants. They're all ballooned under one. And then we have our IDLB, which is special ed. We have IDLB Formula and IDLB Preschool. And then of course we have our Perkins 5, that's for our CTE. So those are the grants that we get almost pretty much every year. We get those grants. We apply for them, they get renewed, we get them every year. And then we have grants that we apply for and that we're awarded. For example, we have the ARP Homeless Act grant that we were awarded. It's $33,000 that we have for all of next year. We have the T-Class ESSER 3 grant. That one initially, when it was presented about 2 years ago, was a large grant. but then we opted out of several decisions, so the final grant amount was approximately $470,000. And then, of course, the two big ESSER grants that we still have going on. Remember, ESSER 2 expires this year, September 30, 2024. And then ESSER 3 grant, which was the larger one, that one expires September 30th of 2024. Because remember, they were all extended for 1 year under the Tidings Amendment. And then we have the Early College High School Planning and Implementation Grant. This grant was applied for back in November of 2021, when as a board and as a district was decided we were gonna go through the early college high school route. This grant, we'll be using this current year, and approximately the grant that they gave us for it was $170,000. That'll help us offset some of the costs. However, this is a one-time grant, so knowing that this will help us out this year, just like ESSER, some of those costs that we know we're gonna have on a yearly basis, we'll have to transition them and put them in our general fund, out of our local and state budget. So that's just something for us to keep in mind. Again, this is just an implementation grant, as it rightfully says on the title. Again, it's just to help us get going. It'll phase out, and then we'll have to pay this out of our local and state budget. And then the final one, the one that we received the good news, we're in the middle of the board meeting a couple weeks ago, the 21st Century Grant. If everything goes well, I believe it's a 5-year grant. They haven't released the NOGA, so we don't know the exact amount, but based on the application that was submitted, for this first year, it'll be about $1.1 million to help us out with a lot of our after-school instructional and extracurricular activities, as well as for tutoring for our kids. Any questions on our federal and state grants? The next one is I already touched a little bit on our attendance and our enrollment. I just wanted to show a slide on our trend, and again, we talk about this on a yearly basis. So this current year, like I said, on the last day of school, our student enrollment was 2,931, which was approximately 10 students less than the previous year. So that tells us that that's a good trend, because it was falling almost 100 plus, 150 students per year for the last 4 or 5 years. So I think finally, we're making the assumption this is all past COVID. Students are starting to come back in. Of course, the only issue we have, and again, it's not just us, it's every single school district probably in Texas and in the nation, is attendance. But compared to a lot of other school districts, I believe La Feria did really great with attendance. Even though we were always used to the 95, 98%, 93% was still probably on the higher end with compared to a lot of school districts here in the valley. Compared, yes. Compared to a lot of them, we were on the higher end, yes.
The asterisk is for hold harmless, right?
Yes, so remember that in 2021, COVID hit. So COVID hit in March of 2020. So the following year, because everybody, pretty much kids stayed home, we went to hybrid. TEA helped us out, and so they gave us what's called a hold harmless. So in reality, in 2021, there was no attendance taken, because they based it on previous historical data, and then they did a formula, and then they took an attendance rate from there, yes.
So it might be lower, like
Yes,
they wouldn't.
more than likely, yes. And because remember that because the kids were from home attendance, they were still trying to understand how to take attendance, whether it was, they log on, they're counted as attendant. So that's why that helped us out tremendously.
So if this is a refined ADA for 2013 through 2014, it says 3,305. So if that's a refined, it would have been more?
That's refined, so on the refined, that's based on attendance. So actual enrollment is the next column. So in 2014, our attendance was 3,600. So given our attendance, remember that I mentioned, and I should have put the actual percentages, we were around the 97, 98% on attendance, yes. Right. And I did want to make a note there, remember legislature didn't change anything. So our district basic allotment, like every district, is still, the basic is still 6,160. I can present it in different ways. If I take all state programs into consideration, of course our allotment per student is much higher. But the basic one, let's say we would have not coded any kids to special ed, to dyslexia, bilingual. If they would have not been coded to any of that, our basic allotment is 6,160, just like every single school district in Texas.
And what are you estimating would be if you were to factor in all the federal?
If we factor it in, it's a little bit over $7,000, ma'am, per student, yes. And I think we've talked about it before, how some kids are coded into different ones, so we get funding multiple times for the same student, yes. Yes, ma'am. Any other questions on the attendance or the enrollment? Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. So this one, again, in accordance to the Texas Government Education Code, we have to present it to the board by function category. So what is function category? As you have right there on the left-hand column, our function categories differ from function 11, which is instruction. Then we have our library or media resources, staff development, which is, anytime we do any trainings for our staff. We have school leadership, which is our principals, and so forth. Again, as I presented in the very first slide, what I like to present is the 21-22 data. And 21-22 data, which that data has already been audited by our external auditors. Then we have the 22-23 data. So the data I had to put there, I had to do a cutoff. So I did it as of May 31st. Am I mistaken? Yes, May 31st. Of course, because we still have the month of June going on, we're still recording expenses. And then our proposed budget for next year. The biggest one that if you can see in there compared to previous years is instruction, which is a good thing, right? We want to make sure we spend as much money as we can in our instruction, which is salaries for our teachers, or any type of instruction for the kids, resources, supplies and materials. So that went up about a little bit under $2 million. And as I've talked in the previous workshops that we've done or in the previous board meetings, a big reason for that was, remember, we transitioned some of those extra positions back into 199. We also budgeted for substitutes and some of our paras out of instruction again, which they were previously being paid out of ESSER. So again, that's something for us to keep in mind. And if you compare the 23-24 to the 21-22, as you can see, they were very similar. And that's all part of the strategy, right? This current year, we moved some of it to save some money in local, and now it's being transitioned back.
I have a question.
Yes,
so
ma'am.
this, the ESSER positions, and I know this was probably, before you were here with us, but I know that the purpose of the ESSER money was to close the achievement, the gap, the learning gap. Were there some positions that we hired specifically to close the gap that we were not able to take in as a permanent position?
There were, with the ESSER funds, closing the gap was one out of the 12 things. And so the positions that we hired specifically for that were the instructional coaches at each campus, was our math coordinator, our English language arts coordinator. Those positions, and we also had STEM paraprofessionals at every campus. So all those were instructional positions.
So there were,
Yes,
We
we
can-
have about 1 million, we have about $1 million in ESSER positions. And so that's why there's no way we can sustain that as much as we would like. And so that's why we made sure that we sent out letters this year saying you have 1 year to go, because we cannot sustain 1 million, even though they have done great things.
Yes.
But what we will have to do now is just, take over those responsibilities.
figure out,
and-
yeah, because we're still closing that gap.
Yes.
Yeah,
And so
and
we're
those
still doing
positions,
other
yes.
things to close the job. So we will have like the 21st Century Grant that we will be able to hire some specialists for that. So we'll be able, we're just gonna have to pivot and figure out, how we continue to close that gap.
We go on to the next slide. And then the same exact budget, I just presented in a different way. I think this one helps us understand a little bit better. We presented by object code. I think this is a little bit easier to understand. So we presented object code, meaning, we have a category under salaries and wages for all of our employees. We have contracted services, supplies and materials, other miscellaneous operating, debt service, capital A, and then transfers in, transfers out. So I think this helps us out understand. As you can see, about 3/4 of our budget, 74% of it, goes to salaries. And we're not the only district. At every single district, you're talking about 65 to 75% of the budget is always to salaries. That's the biggest category in there. Right after that, of course, is our supplies and materials. That includes everything from not just your typical classroom supplies, it includes software, any type of curriculum software for the classrooms or for teaching. And so that's the next biggest category. But again, I wanted to present it in this format, so I think it helps us understand a little bit better where the funding goes. Next page, please. The next one is our food service budget. So our food service budget, again, they've been pretty much self-sustained, except for that 1 year, a couple years ago, and that was again because of COVID. We didn't have the same number of claims. We weren't giving out the same number of meals since a lot of kids were at home. But again, they've always been pretty self-sustained, so we budgeted pretty much similar to the previous year. We do expect to get a little bit less of revenue, just depending, again, this could be adjusted as the year goes on. But based on my estimates, it would be about 2.9 million this year. I did want to point out, if you can see there, under expected revenue, it's 2.9. However, under projected expenses, it's 3.1 million. Well, why is the expenses higher than the revenue? The reason for that is, remember that we brought to the board several capital projects that were going to be paid out of the food service fund balance, and some of those projects have not been completed. So just similar to the general fund, where the scoreboard and the gate and the painting are not completed, so they roll over, some of their projects are also rolling over. Specifically, the remodeling that they're doing at the high school cafetorium. Remember, they are doing the repainting, all the brand new tables and chairs. And then out of the 2 vehicles that they purchased, they still have not received one of them. So all that will be paid with next year's budget, but it'll be out of the food service fund balance. Okay, so if we go on to the next one is debt service. So debt service, as you all can see, and before I go on to the 23-24 year, we look at the 22-23 projected revenue. So again, we had that big issue, right, with our comptroller, property values coming in way higher than our CAD values. We based our tax rate based on our county appraisal values, because those are given to us in July. So when we adopt the budget, pretty much the only data we have is what the county appraisal district gives us. However, the comptroller, at the state capitol, they released their property values in late December, early January. That is what TEA uses to fund us, not just based on our state aid, but also in our instructional facilities allotment, which is to pay our debt service. Because there was such a huge gap, they reduced that amount significantly. So if you look under the 22-23 actual revenue, which is the middle column there, as of May 31st, we've only generated about 1.2 million, when we needed to generate about 1.7 million to pay our debt service, our bonds. And so we'll cover that in one of our budget amendments, how we'll be able to address that. So for next year, now that the CAD is using comptroller property values, they caught up with them. And that is why the rate that I used earlier was at the 20 cents, which is a little bit higher. That is the amount I used in order to be able to generate about $1.7 million, because that will be our projected bond payments, our long-term debt service for next year.
So a few months ago, the board approved a resolution about appealing that process.
Mhm.
So now you're seeing in different aspects how that
Yeah.
affected us.
And that doesn't mean, in terms of our financial statements, remember, that's a snapshot as of 6/30, so that's what gets presented to the board. That doesn't mean that's final, that's just a snapshot. We don't have the revenue yet, so we cannot record it in our books. However, after talking to the chief appraiser, and because of the appeals that's going on, they feel very confident that the TA will agree with them, the way they calculated it. Having said that, TA can always come back and make those adjustments and pay us that lost revenue. Unfortunately, we won't get it this year. Fortunately, if we get it this coming year or the following school year, that'll just be additional revenue that the school gets. But because it's still in the appeals process, when we do get that revenue, or if we do, that'll just be extra revenue that the district will get, and it won't penalize them in any form, because this is being paid for the 22-23 year. It's just money that is owed to the district. So that was one thing I wanted to make sure. We might, this year, it might be tight, where we have to pay some of it from our fund, from our general fund. But if we do get that back in a couple of years, or maybe this coming year, hopefully, then that'll help offset that cost. So again, the main thing to get out of our debt service, this is our bonds. This is everything that was passed through a bond, our community, our taxpayers approved. So our payment for this coming year, for 23-24, will be around $1.7 million that we have to pay. Now, we go on to the next page, there is good news to this. The good news to this, so when I was looking at it, I was talking to Ms. Torres, you know, ma'am, in a couple of years, you know, our bond series 2014A is gonna expire, it's gonna mature. But the biggest one that I wanted to point out was the last one, bond series 2017. That one is set to expire in 4 years. That's, you know, that 4 years is not that long. That's the biggest one that we pay every year. We pay almost $500,000 there. So if we get rid of those two bonds, once they mature, and that's a different conversation for a different time, but that's when the district and the board starts looking at possibly, you know, generating new bonds to be able to, you know,
Take care of our facilities.
take care of our facilities, yes, exactly, exactly. So, and meaning it won't be such a burden on our taxpayers. So, that was, in my opinion, that was really good news, that some of these are gonna mature in 3 or 4 years. Okay, and then, so that's it, I don't know if the board, the community, if anybody had any questions or any comments? No, that's it, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Like Mr. Cepeda just said, this is an open meeting on the proposed budget and preliminary tax rate for the school year 23-24. It is now 6:40 PM, and we will close this open public meeting and reconvene to the regular scheduled board meeting. I would like to say that, I did not ask if there was anybody for public comment, I'm assuming there isn't, so, thank you, Ms. Ramos. The first item to consider and take possible action is to approve the budget for the 23-24 fiscal year.
Thank you, ma'am. So now that we've gone over, discussed on our proposed budget, this is for the board to approve our budget for next year. So essentially, this is the exact same information. Again, according to code that we have to provide you, we have to present it in functions, according to function code. And so again, the estimated budget that we're bringing to the board to approve would be $35,325,890. Again, I kind of went through all the functions, where we saw some of the increases. Technically, we also discussed about why our budget is slightly higher than last year's adopted budget. Even though our state aid went down, our federal and our local aids went up. So if you have any particular questions on the functions or on the total that I can address.
No.
Do I have a motion?
Yes, Madam President. I move to approve the budget for the 2023-2024 fiscal year.
Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Ms. Johnson, a second by Mrs. Martinez. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Next is discussion and consideration to approve the budget amendment number 2 as presented for the 22-23 fiscal year.
And you also have a copy, if it's easier to see, he provided you a copy as well.
So as I was mentioning earlier, I know that we are going to have some loss of revenue, both from, because of the property values and because of our attendance being slightly lower than what we anticipated. But remember that as of 6:30, again, our fiscal year ends this Friday. So pretty soon, the next 2 or 3 months, our auditors will be out here auditing everything from our general ledger, our financial statements, our procedures, all of our special programs, which is all of our federal and state grants, specifically ESSER 2 and 3, because those are considered high risk from the state. Having said all that, we have to make sure, so that we're in compliance, that when the auditors look at our general ledger, by function, and that's how the board approves our budget by function code, that our functions are not over, that we didn't under budget, that they're not over. So having said that, there are some funds that we have to move around in order to remain compliant. So we are gonna be moving some funds into function 23 and 31, which again, those are school leadership and counseling, into extracurricular activities, which is our athletics and our band and our UIL. And then we're also moving some funding into our facilities maintenance, into security, because we did have to buy some supplies with a lot of the recent, requirements that we had from the state. And then, of course, at the bottom, we're increasing our function 81, which is our facilities acquisition and construction, to help us cover some of the high school painting that was approved last board meeting. And then, of course, the transfers out. That's the main one that I wanted to, if the board can look at, which would be function 89. So we're moving $450,000 from general fund to debt service to help us cover the payments that we make for our bonds. In my opinion, this is a one-year thing. Again, those $450,000, the plan or the goal is that once the appeals goes through and it is approved, that money will be given to us back from TEA. But in the meantime, because of that loss of revenue, we do have to cover our debt service. Now, if you can see under function 11 and function 53, we are taking some of the funding there. So none of this coverage will be coming out of fund balance. All of this will be, we're moving some of our funds around, because in some of the other function codes, we over budgeted, or we just didn't have any major expenditures. And then the other part is because we, based on our initial estimated revenue from the year to now, we estimate to generate a little bit more revenue, like I said, not from the state aid, but from our federal and our local funding. We do expect to generate a little bit more revenue there. So again, this is not coming out of the fund balance. This, the entire budget amendment would be within our generated revenue. And then part of the budget amendment, we also have to do one for food service. Theirs is only for $15,000. That's actually good news, because we brought everything to the board, other capital projects, the 2 vehicles, the redoing at the high school, and all of that is out of their fund balance, but they are expected to generate enough revenue to cover all that. So what does that mean? That they might only end up paying about $15,000 out of fund balance, so they might still have a pretty good fund balance for next year. But we won't know that until we finalize our numbers, and then once the auditors audit all of our food service financial statements. So again, it goes to show how food service is pretty much self-sustaining. But we do have to cover to make sure that we are, within budget per their function code.
What falls under, function 89?
No, function 89, ma'am, that is just specifically transfers, so there's nothing there. So that's why we have to add the $450,000. That is gonna get transferred to debt service to pay for our bonds for this year.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll be to pay our bonds. Because we were short there because of the whole issue with the property values.
Okay.
Yes.
And under the extracurricular activities?
So that one, the 115,000, part of it is because they had to roll back the turf, which was 44,000, where the scoreboard is. The other part, when I talked to band and athletics, the biggest one was student meals. And it still seems to be an issue. If you all recall, last year the board increased their local to $8. And then we increased their regional to $37 a day. And then the state was always at $50. Having said that, because our extracurriculars were pretty much back to normal this year compared to the previous 2 years, our student meals were really high. And even then, we've gotten feedback from them when we met with the band directors, when we met with the coaches. Even with the $8, they are still struggling to be able to get some of those. And they're having a hard time with some of the restaurants, because the restaurants also have to be able to meet that demand, and they can only go so low, and they're still having trouble with the $8. So that's something that Mrs. Torres and I have discussed, of possibly bringing it at a later board meeting to increase it. But if we do, just knowing that if we increase that, it comes out of function 36.
No, well, that's necessary, and I'm glad that, that the
Yeah.
kids are, well,
Yeah.
$8 is very much, but it is.
And the coaches and the band directors and all the UIL sponsors, they do a great job trying to figure out, where to feed the kids with those $8 per student. But like I said, it's getting harder to get, restaurants to honor that price. So that's just something for us to consider going forward.
I just wanna make a comment. I like how, this slide, and particularly how you display where it's coming from. It's
Right.
very transparent, and then you have your, notes. This is very,
But those were
Easy to
my
understand what's
yeah, those
going
were my
on.
notes. I told Ms. Torres, I
This is
can remove
perfect.
them. But yeah, we always wanna be transparent exactly where the money's going to. And that's one of the things that our auditors will double check. And I told Mrs. Torres, we wanna make sure we're within budget for every function, because it's something that has to be done.
Yeah, with the amendments and so
With
forth.
the amendment, that's correct, yes,
And
ma'am.
it makes it more
Yep.
understandable.
And I really think that the addition, money to those functions is extremely necessary.
Yes, it is, yeah.
So I'm very, I'm happy that.
And
you
and just so we know, so for next year, we already took all that into consideration. So for example, in function 36, we already increased that because we estimated, because this year was kind of a beta test where not only was it the first year where all activities were 100% again, this was really the first year that we increased it. So we really didn't know what was gonna be the financial impact. Now that we got a good idea on it, we increased almost every single category, athletics, band, UIO, we increased all of their student travel to cover for those meals.
You know what is positive about this is none of the money, it all came within the budget, it just was moved from function. So it's, you know, it was all there, it's just we had
Yeah,
to
and will
recategorize.
they have a hard time? Yes, because if we rearranged it, that means that there might be less money for general supplies, for equipment. But it's just until we get, you know, maybe more news from the legislature for more funding, then maybe we can help them out. But like Ms. Torres said, that's a good note, an important note is that we just rearranged the funding, so.
Yes.
So it's not like we are increasing it additionally, it's just we're increasing
We didn't have to
the
touch
student
the fund
travel.
balance or anything.
Yep.
No, that's good, very good.
Any other questions or comments?
Do I have a motion? We have a motion by Mrs. Martinez, do I have a second?
A second.
We have a second by Ms. Casas, it's been moved and seconded to the budget amendment number 2, as presented for the 22-23 fiscal year. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Next item, the discussion and consideration to approve 23-24 teacher salary schedule and compensation plan.
Okay, so this one that we're bringing to you, a lot of it has not changed, again, because we don't know what legislature is gonna pass. Nothing has been passed yet, so we're waiting for special sessions to take place. So because of that, our teacher salary schedule stayed exactly the same as the previous year. The only things that we did change was on the stipend side, and some of these stipends have already been board approved at previous meetings, but if we can just scroll down a little bit, so that the board members can see. And I highlighted them in red so that you can know where the changes are coming from. So we are changing the way we pay out our bilingual and our ESL stipends. Previously, it was $1,500 per teacher that was servicing either a bilingual student or an ESL student. This year, it will range depending on the number of students they service. Now, we thought that would be a lot more fair for our students, for our teachers, for those that have 20, 15, 20 students compared to those that might only have 1 or 2. The other changes that we had, of course, was the board approved a couple months back, our special ed, self-contained and resource stipends, those were increased. So they already been board approved, I just wanted to point out that this is on the new plan. And then, of course, the dyslexia, that was a brand new stipend that was issued out, was also already board approved. If we go on to the next page, one of the other things that will have to be approved today with the salary schedule is we are increasing our extra duty hourly rate for our teachers. It's always been $25, except in the summer, because we have that additional ESSER funding, we would always bring it to the board to increase it to $35. Now, because of the 21st Century Grant, we're bringing it for the entire school year to increase it to $35 an hour. This is for our teachers.
That's great.
Awesome.
Okay, and then, so we go on to the next page. In our administrative and compensation plan, so for administrators, there was only one change that we did. And that was our assistant speech pathologist. We moved that position from a pay grade 1 to a 2 because that one does require certification. On top of their degree, they do require to be certified, so we felt it was fair to move them to a pay grade 2. That is the only change we did on administrators. If we go on to under clerical and paras, under paras, there was only one change we did, that was to our nurses. Compared to, according to our TASB salary study, nurses, on average, their schedule is the same as teachers, 187. Our nurses were at 198. And now because we do a lot of the enrollment up front, we do a lot of the enrollment in the spring and in the summer, we decided it would be in the best interest of our nurses that they would be at 187 like our teachers. So that's the only change that we're doing. We're not changing their salaries, we're just changing their days from 198 to 187.
And that's for our LVN and our
Our,
nurses.
yes, so we have two types of categories, LVNs, and the ones that don't have that license, they are nurses aides, yes. And then so that's it, and then on the last page, that is the addendum that we're bringing. Because we were awarded the 21st Century Grant, what we're bringing to the board is to approve the positions for a program director under the 21st Century Grant, the campus site coordinators, which would be at each campus except the academy. We are also bringing early college high school stipends. As I mentioned earlier, we have that $170,000 stipend. So this right here, the ones for early college, that's a one-time thing,
1 year grant.
1 year, to help them get going and implementing early college high school. All of our counselors there would get a one-time $1,500 stipend. And then our dual enrollment, our teachers. This is to help our teachers not only teaching, but that they get paid, compensated fairly. So based on their courses and how many students are enrolled in there, it would range from $250 or $500 per course. Now to put that a little bit in perspective, for example, if an English teacher, the first semester are teaching 3 courses, and all those courses have more than 15 kids, that's already a $1,500 stipend in 1 semester for our teachers. And I think rightfully so, because they are teaching college courses. And then, of course, we have our T-Class ESSER 3 grant. So again, as I mentioned earlier, when we had the public hearing on our grants, we have the T-Class ESSER grant that's also gonna expire. So this is a one-time grant that is given out to a teacher that they're following the guidelines. They are teaching an education and training course. So because they're teaching that course, they are eligible for this $2,500 grant. This is also, I just want to point out, the early college, high school, and the T-Class, they're one-time grants, just for the 23-24 school year. The 21st Century Grant, if we're able to get it all 5 years, then those positions would be for the 5 years. And this, we will bring to the board on a yearly basis for approval. Any questions on these positions? These were the main ones out of everything. These are all brand new.
Yeah. Madam President, I would like to make a motion. I move that we approve the 2023-2024 teacher salary schedule and compensation plan.
Do I have a second? It's been moved by Mrs. Johnson and seconded by Ms. Martinez to approve the 23-24 teacher salary schedule and compensation plan. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The next item is discussion and consideration to approve the bank depository services contract.
All right, so this next one is our bank depository. So a little bit of background information on this. So school district, we must have a depository bank. This is not our investment pool account. This is our regular, everyday banking services that we have, where TA can deposit some of our funding. So this one, the contract, it has to be renewed every 2 years. Now, when that first contract goes out for bid and gets approved for 2 years, TA allows us to do 3 2-year additional term renewals. So we already exhausted all of our 3 2-year additional renewals, meaning that for the last 8 years, we have been with PNC Bank, and actually we've been with them a little bit longer than that. But for the last 8 years, we've been under the original bid, as I guess, per se. So now we went out for bid. We did have 4 banks that bid for the bank depository services. So I just wanted to provide a little bit of information on that, on some of the changes that TA did as far as we don't providing them the copy of the contract. So if we go on to the next slide. There, so when we went out for bid, this is the timeline that we did. The bid was released on late May, and then we did give them a deadline to submit those bids. And then today, we're bringing it to the board because our current the bank depository contract with PNC is set to expire this Friday. So I also wanted to just give a quick copy on the attachment on the bank accounts that we have. So we have approximately, if you can scroll down, I believe it's 7 accounts in total. We have our general operating, that's where all of our funding comes in. We have a payroll and finance clearing there. We move funds specifically just for payroll when we do our monthly and our bi-weekly, and we pay our payroll liabilities. For finance, that is our AP check runs that we do on a weekly basis. We also have our property taxes. That's where the county appraisal district deposits all the daily, they deposit, any collections that they get. That's to pay our debt service, the ones that I talked about, our long-term. And then we have 2 student activity accounts. We used to have 6, but because of one of the GASBs that passed, now only student activities, we only have 2, which is the high school and the junior high. And then of course we have our health insurance co-op, we have it also with PNC. So those are the ones that we went out for bid. If we go on to the next slide, or I think the following one. So this is just some of the data that we presented on the bid, and this is just for your review. If you have any questions specifically on those, and if not, we can go on to the following slide. There. So this is the criteria that we presented on the bid to the banks to let them know this is how it's gonna be evaluated. And like I said, we had 4 banks submit a bid. We had our current bank, which is PNC Bank. We had Texas National Bank. We had Lone Star National Bank, and then Plains Capital Bank. So once they were all submitted, we did have an opening to make sure that the bids were accepted, that they were properly submitted. All 4 banks' bid were accepted. We had a committee, we met, and we went ahead and we ranked them, so if you scroll down to the rankings. And so out of all of those, PNC came out with the highest score. So I did talk to a couple other banks earlier today, because they did wanna know, mainly some of the reasons why. And they all did have different, interest-bearing, they had different interest rates, they all had different types of fees. But after talking with the committee, I think the consensus was, for us as a community, factors D and E were probably the biggest ones. I think factor D for us was the current relationship that we have with the bank. We've been with them, I wanna say for maybe more than 12 years, when it was, Compass Bank, and now it's PNC Bank. And then the main one was, here in La Feria, we only have one brick and mortar bank, which is PNC. We used to have a Plains Capital, but then they moved on. So that was a big key for us as well, making sure that our employees, even though there's few of them that get a check, or our vendors, when they get a check, they can, walk down and be able to cash their checks. So having said that, it is our recommendation from administration, that we accept the bid from PNC Bank, and that we begin a new 2-year contract with them, with the possibility of extending it for 3 2-year additional terms. Any questions on the bidding or the criteria?
Jobs are very self-explanatory. Do I have a motion? A motion by Mrs. Martinez, do I have a second?
I second.
I have a second by Mrs. Johnson. All in favor say aye. Thank you. Next is discussion and consideration to approve the Techless T-Class Education and Training Stipend for the 22-23 school year.
Okay. Sorry, Mom, I need some water. Okay, next one. T-Class. So the board just approved the T-Class stipend for the 23-24 school year. Now this is a 2-year stipend. So we have not yet approved the one for the current year, the 22-23. So this is one teacher that's been teaching an education and training course. They already taught it this school year. They have not been paid the stipend, but we need to approve it. The board needs to approve it before we can issue out that stipend. That's what this is for. This is for the current year. The one for next year was just approved in the compensation plan. So I don't know if you had any additional questions on that one. I kind of explained on the type of course that they have to teach. It was under the T-Class grant, and it is like I said, it's a stipend for 2 years. Each year is for $2,500.
Madam President, I move that we approve the T-Class Education and Training Stipend for the 2022-2023 school year under Decision 4B of the T-Class ESSER 3 grant.
Do I have a second? Ms. Martinez, it's been moved by Ms. Johnson and second by Ms. Martinez to approve the T-Class Education and Training Stipend for the 22-23 and 23-24 school year under Decision 4B of the T-Class ESSER 3 grant. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next item, purchase purchase orders over $25,000.
Okay. So on the first item, it's discussion and consideration to approve band instruments at WB Green. So this, we've already brought it to, we took this to TA. This is under the instructional materials and technology allotment. So again, before we bring it to the board, we do have to get TA approval for this. This is to replace some of their old instruments. This is a total of 10 instruments that will be replaced. These are a little bit on the higher end. So after talking to Mr. Flores and talking to Mr. Cardona, yeah, when we met, he said, I do really need to replace some of these instruments. We've already gotten TA approval. Now, because they are over 25,000, we do need board approval for these.
And we're paying this out of.
Out of the instructional materials allotment, yes, so we're paying out of there. It is allowed under there because it's considered instructional materials, just like textbooks. So I don't know if you had any question on the type of instruments they are.
Are they like the tubas?
Yeah, they are tubas,
That's
yeah.
not baritone,
Yeah.
that's why. They're expensive. Motion.
A motion by Mrs. Martinez, do I have a second? A second by Mrs. Casas.
Four tubas.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the Guitar Center Stores Incorporated as a vendor of record for the purchase of band instruments at WB Green Junior High School. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Next is discussion and consideration to approve the purchase and installation of new playground system at David Sanchez Elementary.
Yes. So as we've talked about in previous meetings with David G. Sanchez, their playground was really rusted to the point that it was no longer usable. I'm not sure exactly when it was shut down, around March or even earlier than that.
It was.
Yeah. Okay, so it was shut down almost for half a school year. But it was not in use. The kids could not use it at all. So we did have to remove it for liability purposes. So we are asking that the board approve a replacement. These playground systems are very expensive. But I just wanted to make, we did get some quotes on them. So what we're recommending is that the board approve American Parks Company, and that is an actual picture of what the playground would look, based from their quote. It's just one is one view, the other side is the opposite view, just in a different color setting. This would come out not of our fund balance, but out of our instructional money, because this is for the students, for the little kids. As I mentioned earlier, part of our budget amendment, I made sure that we had enough funds to be able to cover this expense in there.
I have a question, they don't have a longevity, I've never heard of equipment rusting to the point that students could not use it.
We have had to
We have
replace it.
bad
When-
equipment.
When they only last for so long. When Dr. Armstead was here, he had to replace all of CEVille because the same type of thing happened. And so we've had to, and Sam Houston did it at one time or another. So after a while, the wear and tear and the type
Yeah,
of.
and specifically, because I had even seen it for myself, we went out there, specifically it's on the slides. So as they're sliding down on the sides, that is rusted. And that's the first place where kids grab onto when they get off the slide.
Then they had one of those things you climb on, and that's made out of metal type of thing, and that rusted as well.
Because, in the parks, it's the same equipment for years and years and years.
What I've noticed at the parks now, they're starting to use a lot more plastic than metal. And some of these playgrounds that are a bit older, they would use a lot more than metal. And I don't know if the metal with a combination of in the mornings when it's really wet, but they were very rusted. We talked about possibly replacing them, but they just couldn't be able to be repaired. But I noticed, I've seen the ones at the park, I take my kids to the park. But a lot of them are now being used with heavy duty plastic, and I think plastic is a lot more longer, the longevity. If you can notice, actually it is plastic. So for example, the ones at Sanchez, these right here, was on metal railing. So the metal with time, the frame, it starts rusting.
And that's fine, I guess my concern is, do we have to start planning, in budget to be saving?
Possibly,
Because we
yeah,
know
definitely.
they're Cause this is important for the kids,
Oh, yes.
and
Yeah.
so.
So just like we have to budget, every year to be able to maintain our facilities, this is part of our
buses
facilities.
and all that.
Yes, ma'am?
I was gonna ask you, it's the summer, it's like 120 degrees, those umbrella, are they bigger than that? At least it's not.
So if I'm not
metal.
mistaken, you still have your canopy there, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they already have a huge
Okay.
canopy under. So we might have to work with the vendor if they would maybe remove those, but they already have a canopy over it. Yes, yeah, because they do get hot. Now, having said that, if the board approves this, once we submit an appeal, because they do not order these until, they order these on a, as we apply for them, they will probably not be ready until October or November. Because it does take a while for them, once we submit the order, for them to actually manufacture it, and then they'll come out and install it. But they would be in charge of everything, but again, it is about a 3 to 4 month timeline.
Do I have a motion?
Yes, Madam President. I move that we approve American Parks Company, the vendor presented as the vendor of record for the purchase and installation of a new playground system at David G. Sanchez Elementary.
Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the American Parks Company, the vendor presented as the vendor of record for the purchase and installation of a new playground system at David Sanchez Elementary. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. It is now 7:09 PM, and we are moving into closed meeting pursuant to Texas Government Code Chapter 551. Thank you. It is now 7:19 PM, and we are now reconvened to open session. Let the record show that the superintendent accepted the following resignations and retirement as presented by the administration in closed session. Araceli Sainz, resigning. Lilia Cifuentes, resigning. Alejandro Cespedes, resigning. Leslie Lázaro, retiring. Also, let the record show that superintendent approved a 1-year probationary contract for the following: Ruby Ruiz, 1-year probationary contract. Jose Barrera, 1-year probationary contract. Jennifer Elizondo, 1-year probationary contract. Randy Resendez, 1-year probationary contract pending completion of required documentation. And Jonathan Alvarado, 1-year probationary contract pending completion of required documentation. I guess we don't have any announcements? No? Okay. Before we adjourn, I would like to say that we're saying good luck and goodbye to two of our own very valuable employees. Mr. Cespedes is going to leave us and go to Brownsville. Their loss, no, our loss. You understood. We understand your reasons for leaving, sir. We don't like them, but you know, of course, family comes first. So good luck, sir, and please remember us here in La Feria.
Of course.
And of course, what can I say about Judy? Judy. My goodness, she served under seven superintendents, sat on umpteen board meetings, put up with all of us. Me too. And we wish you the best, Judy. We just don't know how we're gonna be okay, but it's gonna be very, very different. I know you're gonna be good. But, you know, like I said, we wish you good luck and thank you for your service to our district.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Anybody? Okay. If there is no other business, I have a motion to adjourn. So I have a motion by Mrs. Casas. Do I
I
have a
second.
second? I have a second by Ms. Johnson. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Very good. It is now 7:22 PM and the meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you.